It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back. Thank you so much for keeping it locked on this Friday morning. Now, news headlines obviously only give us just a morsel of that juicy full story. If it's breakdowns, opinions, and discussion you need, Expresso is here to help, armed with an expert. We're joined once again by one of our favorites, media practitioner Nash Makado, as we discuss some of the biggest headlines on the front pages of newspapers across Mzansi this Friday. And of course, we encourage you to please join the discussion at home. Share your thoughts, your opinions, your insights via our WhatsApp line, and that's 063408 8863. Now, I mean, the one story is going to trigger everyone whenever we talk about Eskom. I know that pushes all of our buttons, but I'm just going to warn you, especially for parents, we are going to be dealing with child pornography this morning, and a terrible story that will trigger you. So please be aware of that. Nash, great to have you back. I want to say it's nice to always see you, but it always heralds a bit of a download of so much intense news. I think we've almost become desensitized to the news because it seems so extreme at the moment. It's difficult to know where to begin in a case like this, because it feels like the story is so big, that the network that's been uncovered is so big, that the amount of evidence is so big that surely this should have been discovered ages ago. So I'm talking now about Jared Ackerman, the co-accused in the case against late advocate Paul Kennedy, who's now been accused of running a child sex ring in Johannesburg. He has recently been charged with attempted murder for handing boys over for intercourse with an HIV-positive client. This speaks to a network around him, not just one man. Can you give us a bit more context of how we've gotten to this point and where we stand?
A repulsive story, really.
Terrifying.
That involves a lot of elites, and because of that, it's been labeled South Africa's own Epstein story. It is believed that a lot more important people could be linked to this. That's just how horrible and bad it is. Ackerman, his charges range from rape, possession of child pornography, sexual assault, and human trafficking. Now, the attempted murder charge has been added to that because it is believed that it is alleged rather, that he knew that one of his clients, Paul Kennedy, was HIV positive when he was handing out these boys to them. Now, Paul Kennedy, he was an advocate who presented evidence to the State Capture Commission and also presided over the law as a judge.
Where do we begin? I suppose the knee-jerk reaction is fear, because clearly this speaks to something that has been well established and there for a long time. When you talk about 740 counts at the moment, how has it gotten to this point? Why was there not a case lodged at count one? How have we allowed this story to build to this point? How has this been able to happen right under our noses, do you think?
The general consensus is that a typical offender, before they get caught, they have abused multiple children. Now, because we're dealing with minors, one of the reasons is that they might be afraid to come up and speak and say, this is what is happening. There is a children's rights activist, Luc Lamprecht. He also said one of the reasons is that these are people you would least expect. They often get jobs that give them access to children. Their careers and their social stature creates a facade of who they really are.
It creates that safety net, and clearly there are more bombshells coming out of this story. Thank you so much for working through this. I know it's been a very difficult one to even broach in the first place, but I think we can expect action really soon. I think we have reached critical mass. The same can be said of another area that has the country in turmoil at the moment, from the highest level down to the base level. There is not a person from our president downward not being affected by load shedding at the moment. So we've been given some possibility of good news, as Andre de Ruyter has now implied that South Africans could see some load shedding relief. Addressing Scopa, he said that 1,862 megawatts will be returning to the grid by the end of March. That's roughly the equivalent of 2 stages of load shedding. Should we see this as a positive step forward? Is this painting over a very clear hole in the ground that we're not going to be able to fill again? Where do we stand, and how positive should we feel about the latest news coming out?
It is positive. There will be some relief. However, Eskom's outgoing CEO, he has said that Eskom is going to require about 1.2 trillion rand over a period of 10 years to effectively end the energy crisis. I personally think that South African banks could play a major role in expediting the process of ending the energy crisis. They could provide solar roof financing to South Africans the same way they're providing car and house financing. So the more, while a solar roof might not be enough to power a South African house, the more South Africans install these roofs, it will reduce pressure on the national grid. And eventually, you know, it will also be good for South Africa because it will significantly reduce South Africa's carbon footprint. 90% of South Africa's electricity comes from burning coal.
And from yesterday, I think with the notion now that we can actually sell energy back to the grid and how that story is going to evolve, I think a lot of light bulbs went off yesterday. I want to know if the march on Luthuli House next Wednesday is going to have an impact, where we stand at the moment. That is what we are chatting about, the latest headline news here in Mzansi, and we'd love to hear from you as well. Weigh in on our social media pages.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back as we continue our discussion with our good friend and media practitioner, Nash Makado, as we continue to discuss some of the biggest headlines on the front pages of our newspapers across Mzansi. And of course, we encourage you at home to join in on the discussion and share your thoughts and opinions with us via our WhatsApp line. And 063-408-8863 is the number to use. I mentioned briefly the march to Luthuli House on Wednesday. With the shift, this minor positive shift we've seen with the opportunity of reducing our load shedding status, if you will, with the added megawatts, how much of this is coming from internal pressure? How much of this is seen as just where we are in the saga? How much of this is intentional is what I'm trying to ascertain. What should we be focused on in terms of the governance and where ANC is in terms of how load shedding is affecting their narrative right now?
Yeah, well, you know, political pressure from opposition parties often forces those in government to act. But I worry about politicizing an issue, you know, that affects South Africans.
Right.
Yeah. Politicizing an issue that affects South Africans regardless of political affiliation. You know, that might distract people from solving the issue at hand. A fight almost broke out on Wednesday on Adderley between DA and ANC supporters. There was a huge police presence, and they managed to contain the two groups by using shields. So this is what happens when you politicize an issue like this.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you pointed out that every South African is affected by it. It cannot be politicized. When we turn to the city of Johannesburg, coming up with some rather hardcore ways of getting their funds back, and we're talking about some major businesses included in this, some surprising names on that list of debtors. What do you make about their campaign to get the, I think it's around 300 million back? They've clearly ramped things up a little bit. Do you see this as being a successful way? Are we going to be bullied into paying if it hasn't worked already?
I don't know, man. Like, you know, there's a college that paid R1 million on the spot after their power was cut. And also, the other side of it is that there are some businesses that have been erroneously targeted, like the hotel in Sandton, who had their power restored after they proved that they didn't owe anything. There's also a service station in Alexandra, I think. So, yeah, there are two sides to this.
Yeah, it kind of feels like these were opportunities to make it look like something big and drastic was being done.
Yeah.
And steal those headlines. What does this say to you if you look from a bird's eye view about the South African culture, our culture when it comes to paying for services? Surely this is part of paying your dues. We should be, but we've gotten so used to beating the system, finding another way. We are talking about small businesses that should be budgeting to pay for their power, surely.
Well, one has to empathize with South African businesses and say that maybe it's because of the economic conditions of the last 2 years that they have had to deal with, right? And also, you would hope that this is the reason why they can't pay, you know, but also reserving judgment is indeed a matter of infinite hope.
And we will. We remain in infinite hope in this country. Likewise, when we look at the world as it stands at the moment, in other major news, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has arrived in South Africa to strengthen bilateral ties and embark on a joint military exercise next month, coinciding, interestingly enough, with the anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine. This has obviously attracted a small group of local protesters waving Ukrainian flags and provides a rather interesting conundrum. What should we be reading into this? Obviously, South Africa hasn't really been very clear in its condemnation of Russia. They made a very clear statement that Russia should desist, but there hasn't really been a harsh stance. It doesn't look like we have picked a side. Are we picking a side?
South Africa has had a balanced response to this. It's really difficult to tell why this particular thing is happening now and why it coincides with the war in Ukraine. But South Africa's response to this has been determined by two reasons. South Africa's trade relations with NATO and its friends, and South Africa's military allegiance with Russia that dates back to South Africa's liberation struggle. So in 1990, Nelson Mandela gets released from prison. He travels to New York. He's criticized for being friendly with enemies of NATO. And his response to that criticism is that one of the mistakes that some political analysts make is to think that their enemies should be our enemies. Our response and attitude to any country is determined by that country's attitude towards our struggle. So it's a similar thing that has happened here.
I think one way or another, it is going to provide some interesting and juicy headlines for the rest of this week.
Definitely.
So you're going to have a busy time in front of you. Thank you so much for helping me unpack some of those and broaching some very difficult content as well this morning. We'd love to hear from you. If anything has sparked your interest, if you've got some major insights, maybe you're playing a critical role, let us know. Share your thoughts with us, 063 408 8863. We'd love to hear from you. Nash, you're a legend. Thank you, lad.
Thanks so much.